to be. So great. Great. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? We know folks will join along the way. And again, we are recording this, so you're welcome to share it with your staff members and others who might not be able to be here today. This is a really exciting topic and an important one, I know, for you all as our partners in the nonprofit world, the patient advocacy community, and our state associations as well, how to break through the clutter with targeted advertising and advertising that works and does not have to be on a great big budget. So that is exciting when I went through these slides with Alex Dickinson previously. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex Dickinson, who those of you who are regulars on this seminar series, she is with Beekeeper Digital, one of the founding partners and a digital leader extraordinaire. So with that, Alex, I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle. Can everyone hear me okay? Thumbs up. Okay, fantastic. Well, I am so excited to talk about this. Let me go over what we're going to cover today and caveat this by saying there's a lot happening in the advertising space. And it's a really constantly evolving, constantly changing. And it's one of those rabbit holes that you can really jump down into and spend a lot of time there. I want to make this as easy and demystified as possible. So I'm not going to go down too many rabbit holes, but would love to hear questions as we go through this. And also would love to know if this is something that people would want more detail on in the future as well. So today we're going to do start off by dispelling some advertising myths. From there, we're going to talk about advertising and advocacy and really dive in on what's the value, what's going on here. We'll look at what do you need to succeed. We'll talk about optimizations and measurements. And this is where we're going to dig in a little bit on some key budget parameters here. Again, focusing in on the things that will give you the highest return on your ad spend or biggest bang for your buck, and making sure that you are able to execute on things that are really straightforward and really deliver the results that you need. We'll talk a little bit about some of the unique challenges of health advocacy ads as well, some of the social platforms and some of the places where you can actually go and deliver ads, have put up some key barriers and make you jump through a couple other hoops. We'll talk about what some of those have looked like, and also we'll go over some tools and tips. I'm really excited to go through all of this with you, and I am going to jump in here. So let's start with some advocacy, some advertising myths. The first myth is that you need a big budget to run ads. When I talk to a lot of clients about running advertising, they say, well, I've only got like $1,000. I can't do anything with that. Or I don't have the kind of budget that that organization might have, so I don't think this actually makes a lot of sense. We've seen a lot of value in organizations running small dollar budget ads and actually getting impact, following through, and actually being able to measure and see how it's useful to them. The second big myth that we want to talk through and bust today is that you cannot measure the impact of your ads. So as I was saying, oftentimes people are worried that just doing a small budget buy won't make a difference, or that advertising doesn't actually deliver anything for you. We'll talk a little bit about what you actually can see and where you can actually start to measure that impact. And the third myth that I wanted to dispel is that it's too complicated to run ads on your own. Although Beekeeper Group is always happy to help anybody in running ads, we really want to empower people and make sure that you understand that this is not something that you have to go out of house for. This is not something that is outside of the realm of your limited or large team's capacity to pull off. And I want to give you a couple of key parameters and some ideas for how you can actually make this execute and make this come to life in your organizations. So let's dive in and talk a little bit more about that big budget to run ads. The first thing is that small dollar ads really work. good results don't have to mean really big numbers. And that's the big thing that you have to think about when you're talking about advertising. I think a lot of times what scares people and what turns people off is that they fear that the most important number that they're going to get out of this is something really big and splashy. When in fact, if you start to understand the details of what advertising is all about and what you can get out of it, you can get really high value out of smaller numbers. It just means you're figuring out exactly where you're trying to get people to go, what you want them to do, and you're able to connect those dots together. It's important when you're thinking about the idea of small dollar ads to understand that your results vary on a lot of different factors. So oftentimes people think if I just pour money into this ad, it will get me a bigger impact. It will deliver more for me. When in reality, it's not actually just about the dollars. It's often about the quality and the clarity of your message and creative. We've spent a couple of the past webinars, in recent webinars, talking about messaging and talking about direct tactics. And we've spent some webinars last year talking about good quality creative as well. If you don't have those fundamentals down, no matter how much you spend on your ad, it won't make a big difference. One thing that I love to recommend to people as well is thinking about those big investment creative pieces that you may have done. If you have a big animation, if you have testimonials or videos, thinking about places and ways that you can extend the life of those with smaller ad boosts can make a big difference. Another thing that changes and impacts the value that you can get out of an ad is the duration of your flight. And I'm going to talk about flights here as the actual length of a campaign. So when you're running an ad, you want to have a start date and an end date. That's the flight, your takeoff and your landing. And sometimes if you are running a campaign for a really, really long time, you might end up spending more money than you would have wanted to. And sometimes a really, really short campaign can also make a difference and may actually cost you a little bit more. You have to find that sweet spot, and you have to think about all the different factors and elements that can actually get you, again, the kind of return on the ad spend that you're looking for here. The specificity of your targeting can make a difference here. So oftentimes people think about running ads and they want to talk to the general public. Or on the flip side, they want to talk to a very specific target audience in a very specific area and geography. Both sides of those can actually increase or decrease at different times your ad budget. We're going to talk about some of the qualities and factors that you may want to consider when you're looking at what's the right amount for me. And we'll look at a couple case studies here and explore, okay, where can we actually find the right level of specificity without targeting everybody? And where can we find the good qualifications in not being overly specific here too? The next fact that's important for us to explore is that ads can get you lots of data. So a lot of times people are worried and concerned that when you actually put an ad out there, you're just throwing money into the void. This is just a very small example right here where you can see we ran an ad for the Association of Clinical Research Organizations around International Clinical Trials Day. They were looking really just to get small impact, really small impressions boost for them. But you can see even just in not digging too deep in here, you can already see that they actually have good quality impact from a small dollar buy. So 336 organic is what they would have had and what they got out of this. But this promotion ended up yielding 20,873 other impressions. We'll define impressions a little bit more later on. Media views is important here too. So this is people who actually went through and looked at this GIF, and total engagements. You can see that the organic really does not meet exactly where you can get to if you actually put some money behind here. So having that boost maximizes this impact. This is just the surface level of the data that you could get on this ad. We used different keywords. We were targeting based on other partners. On Twitter and on most of these platforms, it's really easy to go back into the back end and dive in and see, okay, this actual targeting is working better than other targeting for us. And that's the kind of information that can be really useful for you to know what's resonating with different audiences. There's a lot more that you can grab and dig out of this, but just wanted to at least highlight this is an easy, quick start to that process. And third, the platforms are incentivized to make it easy for you. So as daunting as it may feel, as scary as it may seem in some ways, the platforms really are incentivized to make it as straightforward for you to do awareness campaigns in particular. So if you want to just get more eyeballs, get more impressions, get specific clicks through to a website, it's actually very straightforward and intuitive. As soon as you go onto the back end of those platforms and you get into their advertising areas, they have templates, they walk you through it, they have really good guided directions there. If you want to get more complicated than that, most of the platforms will also continue to give you easy step-by-step instructions. And also, the internet is full of a lot of people who have done campaigns similar to this. We'll talk through some of the steps that we know that you need, regardless of whatever campaign you're putting together. But I think it's important to not be too scared of these things first and foremost. All right, let's talk a little bit more about advertising and advocacy and why it's so beneficial and important to do these together. So, why run ads for advocacy at all? First off, you want your message to be heard. If you are trying to go out there and share some sort of specific message with a specific audience, ultimately, a small boost can help make sure that that ad is actually going out there, that that message is getting out there. Without that, you might not be able to cut through the clutter. Organic content or content that you're posting that doesn't have any money behind it is still beneficial, but you do need to have that other flip side if you really want to cut through and you really want your message to be heard. Another great reason to run ads is you want your message to be heard by specific people. Although there are some capabilities to doing targeting without paid boosts on these platforms, that is the fundamental best way to actually go out there and do, again, this specific targeting, making sure that you have the message going to the people that you want it to reach. The third thing is that you want your audience to grow. If you want to maximize the people that you can reach on a regular basis, either on your social platforms or in other places, social advertising is a great place to start. We'll talk a little bit more about other advertising as well, but wanted to just flag social advertising is definitely a good area for that. Another way and thing that I hear a lot from organizations is that they need some good numbers to share. I can't tell you how many times I've had to go to a board meeting or help prepare a presentation where they wanted to show some sort of impact. Sometimes it's around a specific event, and sometimes it's just around some sort of growth. Small dollar boosts, small advertising can help you show that impact and show those numbers. We'll talk through what some of those numbers can look like here as well. Generally, though, there are three kinds of ads that I recommend and that we recommend to our clients who are doing advocacy campaigns. They are acquisition ads, persuasion ads, and action ads. Acquisition ads are going to be ads where you are building your list of supporters, or again, you are working to recruit more followers. They do tend to be a little bit more expensive than other kinds of ads, but it is, again, a great place where you can see that direct impact of your spend. What you're spending gets you an email address that you can then use to build into your overall email program. Last year, we did a really great email in the deep dive in one of the BIOTechnical webinars. Highly recommend looking at that. This is a great way for you to start to source some of that information. Again, recruiting more followers to your social channels can be helpful, especially if you're focusing on people who are going to be of particular interest for you in the future, or that you may want to engage with them as well. Persuasion is the next type. There are two different areas of persuasion that make a lot of sense for advocacy campaigns. The first is just in increasing awareness, and the second is in persuading people of some sort of perspective. When we're talking about persuasion, we're actually going right up to the point of action. So it's sort of environment shaping versus direct call to action. It's trying to share and saturate a message versus trying to actually direct people to a specific thing that they should do. And this third type is that action. And oftentimes when we are building our communities, we're thinking about what are the actions that we're going to have people take. Oftentimes it's visiting a website, watching a video, or signing a petition, or contacting Congress or some sort of state legislature. These are the kinds of actions. They also can be a little bit more expensive. So that persuasion approach is important and tends to be the cheaper of those three options here. When you're looking at the overall environment of digital campaigning right now and advocacy right now, it's important to note that we're seeing some big shifts and changes. In particular, when you are trying to get people to take an action, if you haven't cultivated those deeper relationships with them already, if you haven't done perhaps some of this persuasion work, or you haven't acquired them, you are not as likely to see the quality benefits in the action side. So I recommend trying to think about your campaigning and your overall approach holistically here. So as part of an acquisition effort, part of a persuasion effort, part of an action effort. This doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do paid across all three of those, but for bigger, broader campaigns where you're building and cultivating a community, trying to get into that mindset of touching on these three elements is really critical. Okay, let's look at some ad examples here. So right at the top, you've got an example from the American Medical Association. This is these are all Facebook ads here, as a heads up. And this first one is a good example of a pretty straightforward acquisition style ad. So what you can see here, they have text and copy up at the top. They obviously have this bold image. This is something that you can really easily do with Canva or in other materials and other design elements if you can set up a template. They have a sign up call to action here, and when they click through there, they actually go to sign up to become a member there. The second one is, again, more of this awareness effort. So this is for Speak Now for Kids, which is part of Children's Hospital Association. So this is for last year's Family Advocacy Week. So you can see we're excited to begin hashtag FAW2020 with the participation of 58 child patients from 37 children's hospitals, hashtag the future is me. There's no call to action necessarily in here, but there is this energy and effort of trying to raise awareness, trying to get people's perceptions in this field. And they are, of course, trying to create that spike around this Family Advocacy Awareness Week. Another great thing to note here is this really wonderful, strong creative that they've got. Having people, having kids always makes a difference, but generally you want to make sure that you have really clear, good space around it. And again, bold colors. So that's something that I really love in this one. This third option with the ALS Association, this is a action ad. So you can see it's critical that Congress provides immediate access to SSDI benefits for people living with ALS. Take action now. They actually have their action link here, and it would link off here as well. You can see support people living with ALS, that strong call to action, and then tell Congress to pass the ALS Disability Insurance Access Act here. So a couple things that I want to call out in looking at all of these. Again, the creative is pretty strong across all of them. They're putting people first, which I think is really critical when you're talking about creating good creative here, but you can also have other elements. But in advocacy ads in particular, people tend to build that deeper connection. Again, I mentioned that this was all Facebook, so that's why you're seeing this sponsored note up here. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the certifications that Facebook's put on, but it's important to note that you can see this paid for by in some of these as well, and these ID numbers here too. And those actually relate to the Facebook ad library, which we'll look at. Of course, social is not the only place that you can run ads. There are other places where you can run ads and other places to keep in mind. It is the one that I recommend the most for advocacy efforts, primarily because when you're talking about advocacy, you're talking about trying to create communities, trying to move people to action. Social media has those built-in networks already. You're probably already engaging in those spaces, so it's a good place to really go in. It's also a place where you can really mitigate what your budget is going to be pretty easily. So I do think it's the best place for advocacy advertising, but there are definitely some other places as well. There are two different kinds of social ads. There are dark posts and boosted posts. Dark posts are posts that do not show up on your timeline. So they actually are targeted only to the audiences that you're trying to reach. Boosted posts show up on your timeline and you're just putting a little bit of extra juice behind them. So they just get that little spike and that little impression boost or whatever boost you're trying to get there. But they are already showing up on your feeds. Another kind of ad that is really helpful in some advocacy efforts is search ads. These are ads that are served to you as you use a search engine. Google search is going to be the most robust of these, and also probably the place that you will get the biggest bang for your buck. And while most advertising is going to cost you some kind of money, even though it might be a smaller budget, Google search ads is the one place where nonprofits may be able to actually get some free money here. So there's the Google Ad Grants program that nonprofits can qualify for. So I highly recommend that you look into it. You can get, I think, up to $10,000 to run different search ads. And those will be based on keywords that are the most relevant to you and will help you boost your presence or your campaign's presence in the search algorithm overall. The third kind of advertising to look at is display advertising. Display advertising is going to be the banner ads that you see on a website. So if you're on a website and you see a long skinny strip at the top with a call to action, that's a banner ad. Sometimes they're on the side, sometimes they're in the middle. There are things called display networks that you can actually work with to get that creative placed and identify the different places that it should go. It is a little bit more complicated than a social ad. It's a little less self-serve. You likely do have to work with some sort of intermediary there, but it is definitely a great area to get that big impression, that big saturation. If you're talking about perhaps a state legislative battle, you may want to think about doing a display buy for the local newspaper, or you may want to think about targeting based on specific keywords or specific interests to get those display ads to those audiences. The fourth kind of advertising that I think can be relevant and helpful, but definitely is much more expensive, is on-platform ads. And these are ads that are served to you on something like Pandora or Spotify. If you don't have a paid account and you're using a free account, you'll hear those little blurbs. If you're on Roku, you may see a little video. These are definitely going to be very targeted, so you can get in there, you can do this, but they're not going to be on the in the $100. They're going to be in the probably like upwards of $10,000, $25,000 ad spends there. Video ads are another place where you can do a lot of different things, and I have them at the bottom here just so that I'm separating them out from everything, but it's important to note that you can do video ads in social ads as well. So we'll talk about that too. But they are ads primarily that you're going to run as pre-roll on YouTube or in some other video platform, something little, short, and also can get you a lot of good impressions on the content that you're putting out there. The last thing that I want to talk about with the value in talking and exploring ads and advocacy is political ad bans, which you may have heard about in the past couple of years. As the internet has evolved and changed in a post-Cambridge Analytica world, really, we've seen a lot of dramatic policies get put in place from some of the social platforms in particular around who can and who cannot post on social media. So these things are fairly involved, and it is important to note that if you are talking about specific political content, you may need to run through a couple of hoops on some of these platforms. Facebook in particular, you have to do a self-certification if you want to run ads that are deemed political. So that means you're actually going to contact Facebook. They have a whole platform for it, and you can send them your ID. They'll send you a postcard in the mail. You have to verify that code, and then you become certified. It doesn't cost any money. It takes a couple weeks to put in place, and it does help you make you capable and eligible for running ads in the future. Similarly, on most of these ads, once you get self-certified as an individual who can place an ad, you might have to also set up a disclaimer for your organization. So disclaimers are going to be on the, again, organizational side. So you as your organization may need to say that you are adhering to Facebook's standards and that you are not going to share misinformation out there. Twitter went a slightly different direction, and they went for any partisan content cannot be boosted on their platform anymore. You can do nonpartisan campaigns, so nonpartisan campaign goals and nonpartisan organizations. You do have to get some certification in there as well for some campaigns, which we'll talk about specifically on health in a bit. But the most important thing to note is that Twitter's actually going to really evaluate the creative that you're putting out there and also the destination that you're sending people to. So if you are trying to do a ballot initiative and you mention a candidate in some way, you may need to strip down any language that mentions vote for this candidate on a page. The one thing that I'll note right up front here is that a lot of times we have seen, we'll put an ad out there, we believe it meets all of the standards and it gets rejected by either Facebook or Twitter or other platforms. Once you get a rejection, if you do an appeal, they have to go back and look at it. They tend to have robots that are going through and doing that first review. And if you go through and get that appeal, you may actually be able to get that placement afterwards. We've had really high success rates in those appeals, and it's been very, very helpful in actually getting ads running. Google also requires certain disclaimers for different kinds of ads. So it just, again, depends on if you're doing something that's more overtly political versus something that may be a little bit more environment shaping as well. All right, I know I threw a lot at you just then, but I'm going to go in and talk a bit about what you need to succeed and how to actually build an ad plan here. Ad plans should be the building blocks of what you're doing in this campaign effort. So an ad plan is going to be helping you think through from soup to nuts what actually you need to pull together an ad plan or to pull together a good ad campaign. The critical part of an ad plan is, again, thinking ahead. You don't want to jump onto a platform and just start building from scratch on there. You want to start with some sort of pre-plan so that you understand where the parameters are and what you are actually trying to accomplish and achieve. One of the reasons that I really recommend having ad plans is because it cuts down on your budget spend and it forces you to recall and remember, okay, I actually do have to set this end date for this campaign, otherwise it might keep running, or I have to actually evaluate and look at the kind of targeting here. So let's talk about what goes into an ad plan. First, there's objectives. We're going to talk about that more in a moment, but objectives typically are going to be the goals that you're trying to get people to achieve. Most of the platforms frame them as objectives, so that's why we're using that language here. Second, most important thing is that you know your target audience. You think about them from a geography perspective. Is there a specific area you're trying to reach? You think about them from the age that you're trying to reach. And you also think about them from what was known as contextual considerations here. So contextual is going to be something along the lines of their interests, things that are related to what we know about them online, some sort of deeper context for their individual beyond their age, geography, and potentially gender. Of course, your budget. You want to know ahead of time what you want to spend. And you want to know what you want to spend on a lifetime basis for the whole flight of the campaign, and also potentially on a daily basis. That can be a great way for you to track and see where you're heading and what you actually can be accomplishing on here. The flight dates, again, that's your start date and your end date. So one important thing to note, when you are building campaigns on the back end of platforms, you can have a campaign level and you can actually have separate ad units underneath that. I really recommend that you explore what that could look like for you. You can do some interesting easy testing that way, but the campaign will have a start and an end date, and some ad units also will have start and end dates as well. So it's important to actually make sure that you're setting them on all of those. And of course, creative assets. You have to have, again, quality creative, or at least a very clear message for what you want to get there. All right, let's talk about those goals. So goals generally are going to be things that you're trying to accomplish, things that you're trying to get people to do on the platforms. They tend to be things like brand awareness or reach, or consideration, which is going to be something like traffic to a web page, engagement with the post, app installs. That's something that you can do on Twitter, for example, video views, lead generation. Again, that's that acquisition, and messages as well. So for example, on Facebook and on LinkedIn, you can actually pay to send messages to people, or have some sort of paid engagement in your messaging with people who you want to reach there. Conversions is the third goal or objective that you can look at. That's going to be a specific action on the site. It can be sales, and I bring that up mostly to say it could be sales and or fundraising too. So a lot of great fundraising can be done through small ad buys. There's a really good return on ad spend for that for a lot of nonprofits in particular. In-person visits as well. So if you're trying to get people to attend some sort of place or go to some place, and also job applicants. And of course, the last goal that you can look at here is followers. Typically, when we're talking about advocacy campaigns, we're looking primarily at those first three: awareness, consideration, conversions, although again, followers can be a really valid thing to do for an advocacy campaign as well. I do want to share an example of what a campaign could look like, and how creative can actually show up in different ways. And I want to share this from a video perspective here. So this is, oops, let me see. Oh, well, let me see if that's showing up. Sorry, getting a little bit of a technical difficulty on my side. Okay, perfect. Sorry. Okay. Nothing like a little bit of technical difficulties. All right, let's go screen two. Here we go. Watch Facebook. So this is a great video from NCLD, and I'm going to just share this right here because I want to share it from a creative perspective. Zoom share. Okay, perfect. So you probably won't be able to hear audio on it, but that's okay. You can see over here, there's subtitles on here. This is an advocacy video. Say no to waivers, my idea matters. So this is a really quick 30-second video they were able to put together with a top call to action here. Again, a good personal appeal, and then over here at the end, that good call to action. I bring this up because I think it's a really important example of a organic post that you can boost and you could use to do any kind of those other goals. This could be something that you could use for brand awareness and reach. They have their brand awareness throughout this. You can do traffic and engagement throughout this as well. So you could set this up and actually have the goal be to click on a link. You could also set it up so that the goal is to view videos here. Another thing that you can consider is actually the conversions. So if you wanted to get people to actually go over to this place and sign up for that petition. So this specific video can be used for any number of different kinds of campaigns. And if they wanted to, they could set up a campaign that would use any one of those goals and still be very beneficial there. Let me get back to the, let's see, the slide presentation. All right, one moment. Yes, thank you, Dean. We do know this is a classic live presentation. All right, excellent. I think I am back and set up here now. Let me share my screen. Again. Oops. All right. All right, fantastic. So I want to talk about a couple of those definitions here that can be real tricky and not as straightforward as they might seem to most. And I've struggled with them for a number of years, but this is, I think, a good key summary here. So when you're talking about ads, there are impressions. And the first thing to note is that impressions is defined as views of an advertisement. I want to really reiterate, it does not mean that it has been seen or that people have really spent a lot of time on that. So it's a great number. It's one of those big numbers that you can share again with funders, a board. It will often be the biggest number in your ads, but impression doesn't necessarily mean that that message has been processed. So if your real goal is to try and get that deeper impact, you're going to want to be thinking about impressions as the vehicle to get to the end goal, but the clicks and the click-through rate are going to be the things that you're going to care about a lot more. That's, I think, a great segue into talking about CPM, which is another key measurement that people are looking at, and that's the cost per 1,000 impressions. I feel like the fact that it is cost per 1,000 impressions is an immediate indicator of the fact that impressions are not always going to be the quality that you think that they are. Again, doesn't mean that it's not helpful or useful, but it is a good thing to keep in mind that impressions is not, will be much larger than any of your other elements here. CPC stands for cost per click. So that's how much it's going to cost for you to actually get someone to click over to a site. We're going to talk about and look at a couple budget parameters in a little bit here too. CPA, CPL, that's your cost per acquisition or cost per lead. Click-through rate is going to be how many people from the overall pool of impressions actually clicked through over to what you wanted them to click to. That's also going to be the cost per fit into the cost per click as well. Cost per engagement is similar to click-through rate. And then cost per video or video view rate, or cost per view or video view rate, those are going to be pertaining to how much of a video and if people have actually watched a video. Some tricky things to note with that. I said how much a moment ago, and I think it's important to know that when you are looking at a cost per view, view might not mean view to completion. So you have to dive in a little bit deeper, and you have to interrogate if you have someone who's sharing you cost per view and video view rate to see if that is actually watching all the way through, watching 10% of the way through, or watching even 50% of the way through. It is rare that you get the majority of your views as full to completion. I would say aim for a really great place is to aim at that 50 to 30% range. So most people are looking in that range. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you have really compelling video, especially in the first 3 seconds. Let's talk a little bit about audience here then too. So audience targeting, again, as I mentioned before, if you're going too expansive, you're not necessarily going to be getting the kind of results that you want. You're going to see a lot of those impressions, but it's going to be spending a lot of your money. But if you get a little bit too narrow, you may end up falling into the trap where you are overspending or where you have to spend a lot of money to reach who you want to reach. You want to find that sweet spot there. And the sweet spot is going to be ultimately having a larger list of who you would want to target and then testing it out on a couple different times in a couple different ways. There's no one size fits all for this. You do have to ultimately be a little bit engaged and involved to adjust your audience and targeting, but we'll look at a couple key indicators of when you may want to adjust that targeting in a moment here. Some things to note, you can target by age on most platforms. Some platforms allow you to target by gender, although that's shifting and changing a bit as well. You can target by location. So that's going to be selecting either zip codes or selecting geographies, states, A good note there is that most platforms don't allow you to target by district. So if you're trying to target for a member of Congress, you have to actually figure out your zip codes. There's of course zip code overlap, so just keep that in mind. And you can also target by interest. Again, that's also that contextual as well. You want to make sure that when you build your ad plan, you know a broader list, or you have a broader list, but that you vet that list against the actual platform in the end. So make sure that the platform you're actually going to use allows you to do the targeting that you want to do. All right, let's talk about budget, because I think that is the most important thing here, and probably the thing that is of interest to most people. Certain platforms will always be cheaper. So first off, display will get you clicks and impressions really, really cheap. It's not going to get you leads very cheaply. So if you're talking about trying to get email addresses, trying to get people to take an action, it's not necessarily going to get that completion through there. So if you want to look at display, it's a great place to do that broader environment shaping, to really put a splash out there. You'll get really big numbers. You can do it for pretty cheap, although again, it does require a little bit more energy and effort on your side. But I think it's important to know that it is not going to necessarily be the best place for actions. A good thing to note is that Facebook will always be a little bit cheaper. And that also goes for Instagram too, although Instagram is a little bit more expensive than Facebook, but Facebook has the broadest base, and it's always going to be a place where you can basically get a lot of impressions and a lot of engagement for not a lot of money. LinkedIn will always be a little bit more expensive. And the reason for that is because it's vetted. You already have these sort of trusted resources on there. And it's important to remember that people act differently on LinkedIn than they act on other platforms. So if you're trying to reach a professional network and you're trying to do some sort of advocacy effort on LinkedIn, they're going to make you pay a little bit more. I do recommend, regardless, that you try a pilot budget first when you can. If you have time, I would just set aside, if you have $1,000 for your ad campaign, set aside $100 of that $1,000 for a quick pilot and see what's working. That way you can make any adjustments and tests for the remainder of your 900 there. I think pilot budgets work as low as $250, but really if you're doing a pilot at $25 or under, it might not be very beneficial. But just keeping in mind that having that test information is going to give you the best information. Another thing that you want to think about in testing is testing different factors. So testing different creative, testing to see if having different audiences makes a difference for you, and or also testing to see if the flight time, your start and end date, makes a difference. And the most important thing to remember with budget is that you build your budget off of what you want to achieve. So let's look at some rough estimates here. This is a very, very top level benchmark that I like to use and that I like to consider. And we'll try and share this around with everybody as well. But this looks at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And it's estimating what are some good benchmarks for you for when you are planning out your budgets here. So on clicks, for example, if you wanted to get people to click through on Facebook, a good estimate would be about $2 of a cost per click. So you can see right here, you've got $2 cost per click, and that's estimating that you'll get at about a 0.5% click-through rate. So 0.5% of all the people who are going to see this ad will actually click through to this. A great way to think about this is to consider, okay, what would be the ideal number of people who I want to actually go visit my site, and then actually build out that in reverse from that cost per click. Similarly with engagements, video views, followers, impressions, and leads. And you'll notice again, as I mentioned before, leads are always going to be a little bit more expensive. Twitter is a terrible place to do leads generally. So you'll want to try and steer clear of there. It's just a lot of money for not a lot of impact there. LinkedIn can also be pretty expensive, but the quality is going to be really, really high on LinkedIn. Facebook tends to be the best place to get leads, or again, this is for those emails overall. Also, just another key observation here, noting that LinkedIn, again, as we mentioned before, is going to be a little bit more expensive on the whole. Twitter's sort of in the middle there, but Facebook, again, tends to be the cheapest. So let's look at a couple other factors, and then we'll go back and refer back in particular to this clicks campaign with LinkedIn in just a moment here. So another thing that you need to remember for your advertising is, again, your flight dates and creative assets. As we looked at with that example before, having a solid piece that you can use in different ways makes a big difference. But you want to make sure that you are optimizing it for advertising. This is a unique twist, but the sizes change for different kinds of ads. So it might not be the case that you can just run an ad, run the same piece of creative that you had done for organic as a dark ad. For boosted posts, that's fine. If it's on your timeline, you're just boosting it, it should just work. But if you're doing a dark post, they have some different specs sometimes. And the specs and sizes tend to change pretty frequently. So you do want to make sure that you are keeping up to date and just doing a quick Google before you actually dive in there. Again, I talked a little bit about before how if you have a campaign that is running for too long, it might end up costing you a lot of money. And if you have a campaign that's running for too short, it might also cost you a little bit of money. There's no, again, silver bullet that says this is the exact place that the exact length that you should be running. But a couple keynotes there. On Facebook, if you want, I would recommend running a campaign for a minimum of 5 days. That tends to be a good time frame, but you can, again, go a little bit shorter there to try and get that spike. Twitter, definitely 2 days is the minimum, but I would try and change out your tweet content with like every week or so. One of the benefits of Twitter is that it is a place where there's live conversation happening a lot. So if you're boosting a post that looks old, people are going to immediately see that it is not something that is of interest to them, and they're going to ignore it a little bit more. The key on LinkedIn is that the audience, an ad will only get served to your audience every 48 hours. So you should at least have at least 48 hours for your campaign, but I recommend at least a week again, so that you can cycle through and tap people multiple times if they are really going to be a good audience for you. All right. Let's talk a little bit about some optimizations and measurements. And as I mentioned before, I wanted to look at that key on clicks for LinkedIn there. The cost per click that we had looked at was $11, and the click-through rate was 0.25. So this is why it's important that you define what success looks like for you and your campaign as early as possible. This is a campaign that was for the American Academy of PAs. This was around their PA week a couple years back. And you can see that they have, again, a pretty decent, clear visual right here. They're asking people to celebrate PA week. PAs practice medicine in every setting and specialty. This PA week, let's celebrate all that PAs do. Get started here. So this is generally a pretty, straightforward awareness campaign, just trying to get people to be involved around this specific event. They had $500, and their goal was to get website visits from PAs in very specific areas. So they were looking to look at people in key cities, key geographies. So it wasn't about, again, a lot of big impressions here. It was all about that hyper target here. This ran for 1 week. And you can see that they got 57 website visits, and that was really quality for them. Those 57 website visits were people that they knew for sure were going to be quality people. They were PAs. They were people who would actually engage in this campaign overall. So you can see this is on LinkedIn. And 57 can sound like a small number to people, but defining success early on and understanding what you're trying to get out of your campaign can help you repivot and help people understand that, no, this is actually a pretty decent and good approach there. Similarly, again, this is talking about the impressions. They got 19,416 impressions. When you go on LinkedIn, you can see who looked at things and who actually, what the demographic breakdown was, that was also helpful for them. And they were able to then use that to pivot over to additional creatives in the future too. This came in at under that $11, so at $8.50 cost per click and a 0.29% click-through rate. So they were really happy with that. The increased click-through rate means that it was above what that average was and coming in again below $11. So defining your success early on makes a big difference in what you are trying to accomplish. Another thing to keep in mind is that it's helpful to track success. Tracking your success and actually going through and seeing who's clicking on things can make a big difference. One thing you can do for that is pixels, and that is basically you have a server. Server is a computer that delivers data to your computer, and a web server will deliver data to websites. And there's ad servers, and ad servers deliver ads to you on websites. Pixels are going to be little packets of data that will actually return back after you visit a website to indicate that you have seen this ad or you have done something with this ad. So it helps share information about completing an action back with people. It's a place where you can actually gather information and see if people actually completed the task. And similarly, it can make your ad show up for people who know you already as well. Some simple ways to actually do some of this is in bit.ly links and also in UTM codes. So bit.ly links are going to be things like link shorteners, where you can actually sign up for a free bit.ly account and track your clicks in a really easy way. It's again going to shorten the link and also allow you to see how many people clicked through. It's a good comparison against what you're seeing in the ads. UTM codes are going to be longer codes appended to the end of your URL that you can actually use to set up on different ads and then track on Google Analytics on the back end. So this is a little bit more complicated, but it's actually quite straightforward. You just create the UTM code and you can track that performance and see which ads are performing, which ads which might be sending you to the same destination are performing better than others. All right, so going to, yes, so I do see a question here. What is a good click-through rate? 29.29 does not sound good. It is actually, it sounds scary. Click-through rates tend to be pretty small. And again, this is remembering that a click-through rate is going to be how many people clicked through to something over impressions. So impressions are going to be really, really high. And you're always looking at, again, thousands of impressions here. So click-through rates tend to be pretty small. Averages and good benchmarks that we put across platforms, Facebook is going to tend to have a slightly higher click-through rate. But when you look at Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, you're going to be looking at around the 0.25 range as actually being pretty decent for getting people to click over to stuff. Similarly, on the engagement side, you'll have people who are trying to engage with your post. So that's why you want to make sure that you're reverse building this for what kind of spike you actually want to see in everything. Let me jump a little bit ahead here and just note that it is important to monitor your ads. So check your costs per your desired results, as I was mentioning. Keep an eye out for spammy comments. If you are getting spammy comments, that's an indicator that your targeting may not be exactly right. And you want to evaluate what % of the way you are through your budget versus your flight overall. So if you're spending really fast, this could be an indicator that you have a really big audience and that you may want to narrow it down a little bit more. If you are spending really slow, that may mean that you need to expand everything as well. A couple other optimizations to keep in mind. If your CPM, so your impressions, isn't where you want it to be, you want to make sure, first off, that your creative is good. So take a solid look at the creative and see if it is popping to people. Look at some of the principles that we've talked about in previous webinars here to evaluate, is this actually resonating? And then try and dig deeper. If you feel the creative is solid, dig deeper to see which audiences are engaging the most. If you see that one specific segment is engaging more than others, maybe focus more of the campaign on that and remove the others. or consider finding other audiences that might be similar to them and try and think critically about what's happening and why is this working there. If your cost per click is too high, you want to lower your bid and change your targeting. So lowering, most of the platforms will allow you to have a bid for your cost per click or for your cost per engagement. So you can actually go through and lower that. And then you may also want to change your targeting there as well. So that's where it might be that you're too large of an audience or too short. And also, as I mentioned, having multiple creatives underneath there can help. And if you see in a campaign that one piece of creative is doing better than another, or one audience is performing better than the other, don't be scared to pause it. Don't be scared to pause the ones that are underperforming. If your click-through rate is really low, so if your click-through rate isn't even getting to 0.25%, make sure that your audience is actually or that the landing page is actually working, that there's no lag time on the website, that there's no delay, and that it is a really clear landing page for the people that you are trying to reach. All right, I'm going to very quickly go through some of the health and advocacy challenges that I think are really important to keep in mind. One of them is that COVID changed a lot. So in an effort to combat misinformation, Facebook, Twitter, Google put in place some COVID-specific policies, most of which are still in place in some way, although they definitely are in flux. So if you want to engage on COVID now, you may still have to have a history of running ads at all. They made it, a couple of platforms made it so that if you want to talk about COVID, you had to have been a known advertiser. You may also need a healthcare certification. So demonstrating that you have some sort of reason to be talking about health, which we'll talk about on certifications on the next slide here. And then the most important one is that they were banning anything that sounded like an urgency tactic and or inciting panic in any way, which could reflect in some call to action language. So when you are actually doing ads around COVID, make sure that your language is very direct and again, not falling into any of those categories. A couple other certifications and things to keep in mind. Twitter, you actually will likely require that you get health certified. So they have specific bans or specific notes and flags around posts that will talk about health claims about the cure, treatment, diagnosis, or prevention of certain diseases and conditions. It is not hard to get these certifications. You just have to demonstrate what your organization is. If at any point in time you are working for an organization that has some sort of FDA approval, you may have to actually go through and get demonstrate that approval and actually pull in some of those approval numbers there. But you do want to make sure that you are not communicating information, and that it won't be important for you to communicate information and boost posts that are on these topics if you don't have that certification. Facebook similarly adds about health with content that includes discussion, debate, or advocacy for or against. And this is not really, this can be about healthcare reform and access to healthcare are subject to review and enforcement. So for example, they say healthcare reform is the most important issue facing our nation, would require authorization and a disclaimer. And that means that you are authorized, again, as a political certified ad person, that counts as a political ad for them, and that your organization has a disclaimer as well. Another important thing to note is that some display networks don't let you target by disease state. So if you do decide to go on the display side and do those banner ads, make sure that you have checked in with them to see if you can actually target. I know, for example, some platforms won't let you target even by heart disease. So that could be a really beneficial and helpful thing for you to know as you go into it. All right. In my last moment here, a couple tools and tips. I recommend using things like Ad Parlor to create ad mockups. This is a place where you can actually see what an ad would look like beforehand. Most of the platforms are going to have really, really robust training programs as well. So if you want to go deeper on some of this, we can help you do that, some of that, but also there's Twitter Flight School, Facebook Blueprint, LinkedIn Marketing Labs, and Google Skillshop. All of those have free of charge classes that you can take and videos that you can watch. There's also the Facebook ad library, which is something that came into place after Cambridge Analytica. If you want to see what some of your competitors in the space or what other organizations are doing in advertising, you can go to the Facebook ad library and just search for any organization and see ads that they've run. They'll give you some top level information about the ad. It won't go into too much detail on the targeting, but it is a great place to get that inspiration. And again, just remember that this space is constantly changing. So definitely did a lot, it covered a lot of ground here. I really want to thank you all for sticking with this. I can take a question or two, but probably happy to answer questions offline as well. All right. Well, thank you all so much. We are going to be doing another webinar on campaign branding next month. And for external questions, definitely feel free to reach out to Michelle, Ashley, or Barrett. And definitely feel free to connect with me. I'm very happy to talk to anybody. You can reach me at alexd@beekeepergroup.com. And I will put that in the chat here. All right, thanks everyone.